I've been working as a cinema usher for 3 years, and by now it's become obvious to me that my cinema's rules are a bit out of the norm. Okay, that was a lie. They're completely insane, but you can be the judge of that yourself. Just a little background before I start. My name's Sean, I'm 21 years old, and I've been working this job for 3 years now. There are 2 reasons why I ended up here and why I didn't leave even after I realized just how messed up this place is. The first is that not many employers will hire a high school dropout with a criminal record for petty theft and drug possession. I made some bad decisions early on in my life, and even though I'm on the straight and narrow now, my life has been marked forever by those unfortunate choices. The second reason is the pay. A cinema usher's job is checking tickets, cleaning rooms between shows, and checking that every movie runs smoothly. Usually ushers earn minimum wage if they're lucky. I, on the other hand, get the same pay as the manager of any normal joint. Although when you take into account the stuff that I have to deal with every day, it becomes a whole lot less alluring. But none of you really care about that now, do you? You're here for the story, and I won't disappoint. So, here they are, the rules of my cinema. Rule number 1. Never ever open the door to room 3 once the movie is started. Sounds simple, right? This rule and the time that I almost broke it were the first signs that I got this cinema wasn't 100% normal. Even knowing about room number 3, you'll be tempted to go in. The room is clever and it'll try to trick you any way that it can. You might hear something from inside, you might be addressed by someone wanting you to open it, but you should never ever do so. The first time that I almost entered room 3 was a mere week after I got hired. I had read the rules, sure, and I had been confused by them, but I didn't question them. I needed this job badly. If I had to endure some extravagant, mysterious rules to get my paycheck, then so be it. I was cleaning up the main lobby where the entrance to the individual projection room is when I had heard it. The thumping of something on a hard surface, and it was coming from room 3. I rushed over to the door. It was clear that something was wrong inside. A thin curl of smoke was coming from under it. The thumping was louder now, as if someone was hitting the door from inside with their fists. The handle was turning, rattling in its joint, as the person on the other side tried desperately to get outside. "Hello?" I yelled, pressing my ear to the flat surface of the door. "Let us out! Help us!" came a voice from the other side. It was a woman's voice, terror audible in every word. Underneath it, I could hear a faint whooshing sound, like a strong wind in a tunnel. It took me a second to realize what it was. Flames. "There's a fire, the door is jammed, you have to let us out," the woman screamed desperately. The smoke coming from under the door was dark and acrid, and I coughed as it caught in my throat. The beating of hands on the other side resumed. "Let us out, please, let us out." I reached for the door handle. Any thought of rules in my head was gone. There were people in there who needed my help. A hand reached out from behind me and grabbed my arm. I jumped in shock, twisting around. It was David, my manager. I had only ever talked to him in my interview for the position, where he had struck me as a calm but distant man. Now he was furious, anger engraved in every line of his face. "Rule number 1, never forget it." "But there's a fire inside, David. The door is jammed. We need to get them out." "A fire? Oh, it's clever today." David laughed to himself, trying it on the new guy too. And then he turned serious again. "There's a reason that we have rules. Leave room 3 alone. Everything's all right in there." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The woman from inside cried out again. She was choking on her words now as the smoke had invaded her lungs. "Please help me, Sean. I can't breathe. Let us out." David laughed again. "You can hear her, David. They're going to die," I yelled, incredulous as to how he could be so heartless. Well, I wasn't going to let people die because of him and his batshit crazy rules. I reached for the door handle. David looked me dead in the eyes. "How does she know your name?" I stopped short. Had I told her my name? No. I looked at the door again. No smoke, no hammering of fists. I cautiously knocked on it a few times. No one answered. David put one hand on my shoulder. "You see, Sean," he said patiently, "room 3 stays closed no matter what. In 20 minutes the movie will end and everybody will come out unharmed, I promise." But I heard her. I saw the smoke. I stammered, confusion taking over. "You saw what it wanted you to see. Take it from me, Sean. Room 3 will try everything to get you to open that door, but it hasn't succeeded in 13 years, and it damn well won't succeed while I'm the manager here. I won't have that happen again." He led me away from the door gently. When the movie in room 3 ended 20 minutes later, a crowd of people walked out. Everyone is unharmed. I checked the room afterwards, and there were no signs of fire anywhere. Rule number 2. If you see a man dressed as a movie character leading children away from the lobby, notify the manager immediately. You know how a lot of cinemas hire people in costumes or suits to promote new movies. Like when a new Star Wars movie comes out and you have guys in stormtrooper armor walking around the building to hype people up. I hated that sort of stuff even before I started working here. One of the odd jobs that I took up after dropping out of school was at a seedy, rundown amusement park outside of town. I had to wear a rancid, unwashed fursuit of the park's mascot for 8 hours straight, 6 days a week. Even seeing one of those things nowadays makes me gag. Now, rule number 2 is a bit of a mystery. I've only ever had to follow it once, and I'm not even sure what really happened. But it's an interesting, albeit gruesome story, so you might enjoy it. The day it happened was our premiere of Avengers: Infinity War. The manager had hired several cosplayers dressed as the main characters to walk around the lobby and take pictures with fans. Now, I was generally okay with that despite my past experiences. The thing that made me nervous was how before the shift began, David had rounded up all the ushers and made us memorize the list of superheroes that he had hired. He was absolutely adamant about it, insisting that we knew them off by heart. If it wasn't for the incident with room 3, I would have thought that he was mad. But by now I knew that not everything was as it seemed in this place. It wasn't a long list, so I can still remember it. Captain America, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Thor. Retrospectively, the poor guy dressed as the God of Thunder must have been devastated how fat his favorite character got in Endgame. I knew that something was up when I exited one of the projection rooms and saw a person dressed as the one and only Iron Man, walking slowly down the lobby towards the garbage room. Getting closer, I could see that there was something seriously wrong with him. His suit had been high quality once, but seemed to be in disrepair now. It was grimy and scraped, some parts in danger of falling off altogether. He smelled horrible like roadkill on a hot summer day. But the worst part was, there was some sort of liquid seeping from between the joints of his costume. It was a sickening dark brown color, viscous, almost like drying treacle. My heart stopped as I saw that behind him was a group of children. None of them could have been more than 13 years old. They stared vacantly forward, following the fitted figure as he led them away from the crowds in a demented column. My ordeal with room 3 had taught me all that I needed to know about the rules. I rushed over to the manager's office, tore inside and yelled into David's room. Rule 2, Iron Man costume heading towards the garbage room. 3 kids in tow. There was a bang from the office as David leapt from his chair so fast that it crashed to the ground. Shit, I should have known. I shouldn't have hired anyone. I shouldn't have frickin' hired anyone. Damn it, I should have known. He was rummaging around in a drawer of his desk that he had quickly unlocked. I caught a glimpse of what he was taking out before he hid it in a pocket of his trousers. A vial of some sort of clear liquid and a long jagged knife made of what looked like bronze. As he tore out of the office, he stopped and grabbed me, pushing a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. Make sure that nobody goes into the garbage room. Don't let anybody inside, you got that. If I don't come out in half an hour, hit the fire alarm and evacuate the building. Then call the number on this paper. There was no time for questions. David tore out of the room and I ran after him. As we had rounded the corner, I saw that Iron Man had almost got the children into the garbage room. He was maybe 3 meters away from the door, the kids still following blindly. David tore past them and rammed open the door. Then in one clean movement, he grabbed the costume thing, threw it inside, and slammed the door shut. The children twitched, like puppets with their strings jerked up and down, and then they looked around, confused. They probably didn't even know how they had got there. So they did what any kid would do in that situation, and they started to cry. It was 23 minutes before David left the garbage room. There were dark red marks on his once clean shirt, and a horrible stench wafted off him. He looked tired. Clean up in there, Sean. If you find anything strange outside of a garbage bag, don't touch it. Just come tell me. He stumbled off into his office. The garbage room was a wreck. The stinking dark liquid stained the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling in some places. In the corner, there were several black plastic bags. A wet patch of that noisome dark liquid was slowly spreading from underneath them. Rule number 3. If a man with a tattoo on his left cheek wants something from the lost and found, don't give it to him. Now this one isn't exactly tied to a story that I personally experienced, but I still have something to say about it. After the Rule 2 incident, David started treating me kinder. I guess he trusted me a bit more since he knew that I learned my lesson and understood that the rules weren't there for benign reasons. They were there to protect us all. I was curious about rule number 3. After some time, I summoned the courage to ask about it, so before one day's shift, I walked into the office and cautiously asked about it. David, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you could tell me more about Rule 3 by any chance. David smiled. Oh, curious, are you? Don't worry, I would be too. He began rummaging about in his drawers and file folders. Eventually, he handed me several yellowed papers stapled together in the corner. Here, read this while you're on your break. Hopefully, it'll slake your curiosity. When my break came, I sat down in our locker rooms and did exactly that. The papers were actually several newspaper articles stapled together. The first was 15 years old. Gruesome triple homicide, family murdered in their own house. Sole survivor tells horrifying story. The neighborhood of Redacted was left in shock yesterday after police found a gruesome murder scene in the house of local residents, the Prescotts. Of the family of 4, there was only one survivor, 13-year-old Redacted Prescott, who was found bound and gagged but otherwise unharmed in his family's living room, next to the mutilated remains of his parents and older sister. Found on the crime scene was an umbrella which the survivor claims his mother had forgotten after the family's visit to the local cinema earlier that week. Cinema manager David Redacted told our reporters that the umbrella had been picked up by a tattooed man the day before the murder who claimed that it was his. Police are looking into the possibility that this man was connected to the crime, but so far their search has proved unsuccessful. The next 2 articles were 12 and 5 years old respectively, and published by different newspapers, but they told much the same story: a mass homicide. One mentioned an item from our lost and founds being found at the scene from the crime. The other didn't, but David had written underneath it in pencil. The same man, what does that tattoo mean? Need to make a rule about him. The last article was what really creeped me out though. It wasn't modern, in fact it was just a printed photo of an ancient looking page. The year printed at the top announced it had come from London, 1899. The writing was hardly legible, but the headline told me all that I needed to know. Fear the stage. London theater shuts down amid murder spree as mysterious killer claims forgotten items. Some rules are harder to follow than others, and some come up more often. Rule 4 is one of the rarer ones, and I thank God for that. Rule number 4. If the lights go out while you're cleaning a room, take a seat. A movie will play. You have to watch it until the end. Don't look away from the screen no matter what you see or hear. This is the rule that gave me the most anxiety when I read it. Having already had a run-in with rules 1 and 2, I knew just how serious following our commandments or failing to do so could be. My experience with Rule 4 happened when I was cleaning out room 1 after a movie. Without a warning, it happened. The thing that I had been dreading for months at that point. The lights went out. There wasn't a pop like a light bulb going off. 1 second I was in a well-lit room. The next I was standing in pitch blackness. I froze. Even though I had been mentally preparing myself for this for weeks, I froze. Take a seat, damn you, take a seat. Finally, my limbs obeyed my mind. I leapt for where I hoped the nearest row was and rammed myself down into a place. Just in time. The screen lit up, filling with static before resolving into the image of a dark, dank cellar. The image quality was ancient, like some Super 8mm film from the 90s. Through the grainy screen, I could make out that there was a single chair in the center of the room. Tied to it was a young man. He was struggling against his bonds, and I could tell that he was injured. Narrow streams of blood streamed down his face from an injury above his brow, and his arms were rubbed raw from the ropes. There was something terribly familiar about the prisoner. Not his face, I had never seen that in my life, but his clothes. I froze as I heard something move behind me. It was the creak of a cinema chair. My back crawled. Someone or something had just sat down behind me. It took all my willpower not to swivel around or to jump from my seat and make a break from the entrance. I fixed my eyes on the screen, praying for this to be over soon. The man on the screen had stopped struggling. He was looking at something behind the camera. It took me a second to realize that he had been watching the cameraman. I almost jumped from my seat as a voice whispered behind me. "What an actor, huh?" The voice was low, a practically inaudible whisper. It sounded human, almost, but I knew immediately that it was anything but. I can't explain precisely how. It was something about the cadence of the thing's speech, almost as if its throat wasn't quite made for human language, and it just did its best at mimicking what it had heard. Even worse, the voice was coming from slightly above me, not directly behind. Whatever was in the chair behind me, it had to be absolutely massive when standing up. Should I answer? Should I just keep watching? The rules hadn't told me about that. I remained silent, gripping the armrest to stop myself from shaking, eyes fixed forward towards the screen. The camera was moving as the person carrying it approached his prisoner. The man in the chair was trying desperately to recoil, but his binds were too tight for anything but the slightest movement. And as the camera got closer, I recognized what was so horribly familiar about him. His clothes. He was wearing a cinema uniform. My cinema's uniform. "Where do you think they got the costumes?" whispered the thing sitting behind me. Sadistic irony dripped from every word. It was playing with me. I didn't answer. The movie went on for about half an hour. I won't tell you exactly what I saw. I don't want to think about it more than I have to. I'm not sure that stuff would be allowed on this site, not even in a description. Suffice to say, I wouldn't wish such a fate upon my worst enemy. At one point, I retched and vomited over myself on the floor. As my stomach convulsed, I almost took my eyes off the screen. And at that moment, I felt that thing's hot, stinking breath on my back. It wanted me to look away. It wanted me to give in. I looked up again, fixing my eyes on the gruesome scene playing out on screen. The thing behind me spoke only once more, before the lights came back on as abruptly as they had turned off. It sounded frustrated, angry even. "You know the saying, Sean. Rules are meant to be broken, or at least that guy thought so. I wish that I could end the story there, but unfortunately there's just a bit more to it. Because the guy on the screen had been a worker here, because he had died for breaking a rule, because David hadn't told us everything, instead keeping us on some sort of bullshit need-to-know basis. Somebody had suffered a fate worse than death because of his secrecy, and I would have him explain himself. Still covered in my own sick and cold sweat, I stormed through the lobby, ignoring the disgusted looks of the customers there. I slammed into the office. David looked up calmly. Rule 4 or 11. 4. Good. Good? Good. You knew what the risk was. You knew what could happen, but you didn't tell anyone. That guy that I saw, the things that it did to him, you could have stopped that. David sighed tiredly. It's better this way, Sean. What? How can it? Let me explain everything to you, David said, getting up to stand eye to eye with me. There was a hint of steel in his voice now and a flash of suppressed anger in his look. I shut up. Some things can be avoided if you know about them. Room 3 is like that. If you know what it wants and how it'll try to get it, it's easier not to fall for it. But some things, Sean, some things only get stronger the more that you know about them. You can avoid breaking Rule 4 with what you know right now. You just need to keep watching. But the more that you know about it, the more direct the thing in the room can be in its attempt to get you to look away. And the last guy, the one that I saw on screen, he knew too much, even more than you do now. It was a mistake that I will never repeat and a lesson that I will not forget. There's a threshold, Sean, that I can't allow anyone to cross. If you know too much, no amount of willpower or strength will keep your eyes on that screen. Rule number 5. If you encounter a room where all customers are looking directly at you and smiling, inform the manager immediately. Rule 5 is the one which has raised the most questions in my mind about this cinema and my work. My encounter with it occurred about 1.5 years into my time here. Something that you should know about the work of a cinema usher. We need to check that every movie is running smoothly with working subtitles and so on. We are only obliged to do so at the beginning of each projection. But if we have some free time during our shift, we like to check in at random to make sure that everything's alright. Unfortunately, it's exactly because of this that I entered room 5 one day, only to almost have a heart attack as I realized that every single person inside was looking me dead in the eye, smiling eerily. Taking care to not even blink, I slowly backed out of the room. The customers never broke eye contact, not even to blink. The second that I was in the relative safety of the lobby, I ran over to David, who was talking with a customer at our small bar. Rule number 5, I said once I had reached him. David went pale. The customer, a young attractive woman, looked over at him in confusion. Excuse me, David muttered in her direction before turning to me. Which room? 5. Follow me. We ran over to the room. Once inside, David gestured for me to remain at the bottom of the rows of seats. Stay here. He didn't need to tell me twice. The room full of customers was deadly quiet, every head silently turning to follow David as he walked in front of the screen and stopped in the middle of the room. What do you want? He said to the room at large. Every person in the room opened their mouth in unison and said in a perfect chorus, Hello, manager. Long time. Cut the crap, growled David. I know your game. What do you want this time? The room laughed in a chilling synchrony. Always so direct. I always liked you. More than your predecessor, you know. David's jaw clenched. His hands were rolled tight. I had never seen him so angry. Just tell me what you want, he hissed through his teeth. Tell me what you want and then let these people go. So impatient. So eager to get it over with. The crowd answered, I want you to open room 3 right now. David went pale. No, ask something else. There are lines that I will not cross. There are rules. The things behind the eyes of the crowd laughed as one. Ah, yes, your precious rules. You think they can stop anything? They stop nothing, David. They only delay it. Giving me information for free, David said sarcastically. You've changed since we last talked. I only tell you what you already know, and my price does not change. You will open room 3 again. For the first time, David hesitated. Only for a second, but the things noticed and laughed cruelly at him. I've already told you I won't do it. That rule is never broken, he said finally. Do you forget your history after a mere 13 years? The crowd sneered. The fate of these people is in your hands, David. You know what happens to them when my price is not paid. Do you seek to atone with this meaningless resistance for the sacrifice that was made because of your mistake? I don't atone, David hissed, and I made no mistake. Would the one who you miss so dearly agree? I think not. The things intoned. There was a charge to silence, and then the crowd spoke again. The price has been paid. These people are safe. David blinked in confusion. What? What price? Room 3 was never the price. The anguish of your remembrance as well as the unanswered questions that will now plague this servant of yours were the price. Screw you, David whispered. Till next we meet, manager. David stormed out of the room without another word. The crowd followed him with their gaze and then fixed it upon me. A smile, a nod, and then the crowd looked up as one and shed their identical behavior. A hidden tension was released. They were free. Rule number 6. If a customer hears noises in the air ducts, assure them that you'll look into it. Take one of the packages marked R6 from behind the bar. Enter the air ducts through the garbage room and place the contents of the package at least 10 meters away from the entrance. Leave the air ducts as quickly as possible. This is one of the easiest rules to follow, although the time limit is worrying at first. It's also one of the most commonly employed, usually coming up about once a week. Thankfully, I've never seen anybody fail to uphold it. The first time that I had to feed the thing in the air ducts was a very busy shift. We had premiered The Rise of Skywalker a few days before, and we were still being swamped by crowds of customers. I was cleaning up the lobby from the ever-present spilled popcorn when an angry-looking young man wearing a Star Wars shirt stormed over to me. Good day, sir. How can I began. Yeah, man, whatever. He cut me off immediately. Could you fix your damn air conditioning, dude? There's something banging around in there near the grill in our room. I didn't pay for this kind of stuff. I clenched my teeth to control my temper at the man's manners, but managed to remain calm. Yes, sir, of course. Sorry for the inconvenience. David will probably forgive you for letting a room of people die at the hands of God knows what, but he won't allow you to be rude to customers. He's kind of just like that. After the customer had stalked off again, I got one of the marked packages from behind the bar. It was strangely heavy and I could feel moisture seeping out from inside it. In doing my best to ignore it, I crossed over to the garbage room and opened the grill covering the air ducts. I could hear whatever the customer had been complaining about. A fast tip-tap sound, like fingers drumming endlessly against the side of the duct. My skin crawled. It was uncomfortably too close to the sound of dozens of long, thin legs. I took a deep breath and I crawled into the chute. The air inside was cold and draughty. The passage was tight and I was forced to go prone, propelling myself forward on my elbows and knees. Crawling forward, I could see by the dim light that there was a pile of something up ahead, around the 10-meter mark. As I reached it, I groaned under my breath. In the chute before me lay a pile of gnawed animal bones. With shaking fingers, I undid the wrapping on my package and I dropped a whole chicken onto the top of the pile of remains. The sounds in the chute had stopped. I held my breath, and then it returned faster. Tip-tap, tip-tap, louder than before, a frantic, hungry staccato rhythm. Terror and adrenaline flooding my brain, I scooted back downwards to the mouth of the passage. How long had I been there? How long did I have left? 30 seconds, 20. The clattering of legs was mixed now with the scraping sound as something chitinous and heavy dragged itself down the corridor towards the food, and towards me. And finally, my legs met the end of the duct. Kicking frantically, I dropped onto the floor of the garbage room, and I slammed the grill shut. The clattering inside had stopped. Listening carefully, I could make out the sound of tearing flesh, and this is one of the easiest rules. One of the rarest rules that we have is rule number 7. I have only ever experienced it once about 6 months ago, and I sincerely hope that I'll never have to deal with it ever again. Rule number 7. If you notice shadows being out of sync with your surroundings, return to the last room that you were in as quickly as possible, alone. Close the door and then return to the lobby. Until you do so, do not touch your shadow under any circumstance. The biggest danger that you can face in this job is becoming too used to the weirdness. That's the mistake that I made with rule number 7. I dropped my guard, I stopped paying attention. I had walked to the other side of the lobby from room 6 before I realized that I had no shadow. Cold sweat covered my brow. I looked back the way that I had came. My shadow completely disconnected from me, lay on the floor by the door to room 6. And another usher, a man by the name of Liam, stood between me and it. He was looking straight in my eyes, a narrow grin on his face. I had to think quick. Whatever was going on, I had to get back to room 6, but with Liam in my way, I had no route to get there, not without confronting him. "Sean, is everything all right?" David called from the door to his office. He sounded concerned, worried even. Could I answer him? Would that just make things worse? I ignored the question and started heading back to room 6. The more I looked around me, the more clear it became how strange my surroundings were. Every shadow was thrown in a different direction, as if each item was illuminated by a different light source. I was nearing Liam now. I slowed down, walking in a manner that I hoped would appear nonchalant, if I could only get past him into the door. "David asked you a question, Sean," Liam said. The thin smile was still plastered over his face. He stepped in front of me, barring my way. "I heard him, Liam. I just forgot something in room 6 is all." "And what was that, Sean? What did you forget?" He knew. I could see it in his eyes. Liam, or the thing masquerading as Liam, knew what I was trying to do. It knew that I wasn't fooled by its act. I heard the office door open behind me. Footsteps approached. "Sean?" asked David. "What did you forget?" He walked around me to stand next to Liam. I had to convince them that I didn't realize anything was wrong. I couldn't get to room 6 otherwise. Even if I did make it there, the rules said that I had to be alone. They couldn't follow me. "I forgot to clean up a spilled drink. I'll just get some paper towel from the garbage room and go finish it." I smiled weakly, cursing my quivering voice. It was a bad lie, and I could see it in David's eyes. He wasn't convinced. "Hey Liam, help him out with that, would ya?" he said, walking away to the office. Liam smiled at me again. It was a horrible sight. "Well, let's go, Sean," he sneered. We walked to the garbage room. My mind raced as I tried desperately to think of a way out of this situation. Liam was watching me from the corner of his eye, waiting for me to make a run for room 6. A desperate plan formed in my head. It was a gamble, and for all I knew, the other rules of the cinema didn't even apply in this place, whatever it was. But it was the only way to escape that I could think of. We entered the garbage room. Liam wasn't even acting inconspicuous anymore. He was looking straight at me, still smiling that horrible grin. With Liam following, I walked to the back of the garbage room, and I punched him in the face with all my strength. The thing wearing his body stumbled backwards, surprised, and in the second of time it bought me, I scrabbled at the air duct in the back of the room, opening it up at the last second. The thing's fingers grabbed me from behind and turned me around to face it. The look of humanity that Liam had worn before was shredding off like a snakeskin. His face grew disproportionate, his eyes pools of shadow. He laughed in my face. "I knew you weren't fooled, I knew it. Well, playtime's over. Time for you to meet your shadow. I hope you like it here because you're gonna be staying with me." I kicked out desperately, fighting against the thing's strength as it gripped my arms. I managed to turn us around, ramming its back into the open air duct. It screeched in pain. "Ever since your master has made me his foolish rules, I've been alone. Well, no more. First you and then him." Finally, I had heard what I had been desperately hoping for. A sound coming from the air duct behind Liam. The scuttling of many thin feet. The thing had only a second to realize what I had done. Its eyes widened. "No." And then it was ripped backwards, as a terrible force tore it into the vent. Bones cracked as its back and legs bent in angles that they were never meant to. And then it was gone, screaming and cursing. I stumbled away from the wall. I had little time. As I ran across the lobby towards room 6, the thing wearing David's body tore out of the office. It screamed in frustration as it sprinted towards me. I reached room 6, my shadow coiled on the ground, trying to reach me but coming just short. David was near, meters away from me, a cry of anger and desperation filling the air. I flung open the door, jumped inside, and slammed it behind me. Silence dropped like a stone. Cautiously, I opened the door again. The lobby was empty. I looked down and heaved a sigh of relief. My shadow was once again at my feet. Rule number 8, if a garbage bag begins moving violently or making noises, dispose of it in the special chute in the garbage room. Do not open the bag. One of the jobs that we have to do here is clear out the garbage room after every shift. This means loading all the trash up on a trolley and taking it to the basement parking lot, where a truck will come and pick it up every week. Rule number 8 is probably the worst after rule 4. It's not as mentally scarring, but it can still mess your head up if you think too much about it. It certainly made me pretty miserable when I had to deal with it the first time about a year ago. I was almost done with the trash that day. One more trip with the trolley should have done it. I was looking forward to the end of my shift and the warm embrace of my bed at home. And that's when a garbage bag spasmed, dropping to the ground with a wet, organic thud, and it started screaming. "Help me, oh God, please help me." I screamed and jumped back. The bag writhed on the floor as whoever was inside it strained against the thick plastic. It cried out again in panic. "God, please, let me out, I can't breathe." My heart was pounding. With shaking fingers, I reached for the bag to tear it open and free the person trapped inside. I grabbed at the plastic, and I froze. Rule 8. The thing in the bag screamed in pain and fear. "Is anybody there? Please, you have to help me." It started sobbing, the plastic shaking and curling in on itself. A chill ran down my back. This thing sounded human. It sounded as if it was in pain. It sounded real. But this place had taught me not to believe anything that I heard or saw. Cautiously, I took a hold of the bag. A hand shot out of the writhing mass and grabbed my arm. I yelled and stumbled back, breaking the thing's grip. "Help me, you have to help me. I can't move, I can't breathe, I can't." The arm had been real enough. I could still feel its grip where it had caught me. The arm had been human-sized, but no human could have fit into that bag. I grabbed the twisting, amorphous mass. The hands grabbed at me through the plastic as it screamed for help into my face. Staggering with its weight, I lurched over to the garbage chute and dropped it over the edge. It caught onto the edge with its hands. "Please, please," it whimpered, almost whispering where before it had been shouting. I can't go back, please don't." I brought the lid of the chute down onto its fingers. It screamed, slid down the chute, clawed at the sides as it disappeared into the dark, and went silent. Rule number 9. If anyone exits room 3 during a show, do whatever they ask. Inform the manager immediately. For all the wrong reasons, this story isn't like the others that I've told. This story will be different, and I'm not sure that I like that. I'm not sure where it'll lead me in the cinema, because this story happened yesterday. Even though that David's warmed to me in the time that I've been working here, I think that he might even trust me. He hasn't said anything about room 3. To be fair, I've been too afraid to ask. So, Rule 9 has always been a source of mystery and no small amount of apprehension. No one that I asked could even remember a time when they would have to obey it. Strange though it may seem that no one had ever exited room 3 during a projection, at least not in the years that I've worked here. No one could remember David ever explaining the command or even talking about it. Rule 9 was as big a mystery as the room it concerned. So nothing could have prepared me for yesterday when the door opened and a smartly dressed man walked out of room 3. I froze in my tracks. No amount of experience in this job could have prepared me for that. He walked over to me as I stood, staring in amazement and fear. "Good evening, sir," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, a blank slate. But unlike the thing from Rule 4, it was unmistakably human. Good evening," I stammered finally. The man smiled in slight amusement. "I wish to speak to the manager." "Shit." Right this way, sir," I replied, trying to fake a calm that I didn't feel. I wish that I could have told the thing to stay, that I could have warned David, but it was as if my brain was in ice, sluggish and unresponsive. We walked over to the office and entered. I didn't even have time to talk. David looked up, saw the man, and went a sickly pale. "Rule 9, Sean. Yes. Leave us, please. Wait for me outside." I obeyed. Nothing could have made me remain in that room, absolutely nothing. I exited into the lobby and waited. Time went by and I could hear the murmur of conversation from inside the office. Occasionally, David's voice would rise in volume, and I swear that at one point I heard him weeping. It was half an hour until David opened the door and walked out. He was even paler than before, like all the blood had left his body. His hands shook very slightly, but I noticed. And the second before he had closed the door, I could see the room behind him. It was empty and the man had gone. "David?" I asked cautiously, not knowing what to say. Is everything... what happened?" David fixed his eyes on me. They were red, rimmed and bloodshot. "Go home, Sean. Rest, sleep, prepare." "Why? Prepare for what?" "We're going to break rules 10 and 11 tomorrow." Walking to work yesterday was the hardest thing that I've ever done. Anticipation and fear mixed within me in equal measure. David's recommendation to rest and sleep had proven to be impossible to obey, and I had spent the whole night dreading what would come in the morning. When I came to work, I found the cinema empty. A sign at the entrance announced, "Closed temporarily due to equipment malfunction." David was already there. He sat in his unlit office, staring at the wall in silence. I walked in and stood at the door. I didn't have the courage to interrupt his thought. Eventually, he looked up. "Sean," he said, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry, my mind was somewhere else." He got up and walked over to me. "You said that we were going to break rules today," I said. "Yeah, rules 10 and 11. Rule number 10, if you find a book bound in black leather on the premises, do not open it." Rule number 10, the black book as we like to call it. You would see it at pretty much every shift, and overcoming the need to open it was one of the first things you learned to do on this job. Nobody knew what was inside its yellowed ancient pages. It moved and shifted mysteriously. You would see it in the corner of the garbage room, propped up invitingly in the corner. You would walk over to a room or to the office, only to see it first in the ground in the lobby, and then in the office itself, lying on David's table as if it had always been there. We had never even seen David open it. Well, it seemed I was going to see so now. It took us an unusually long time to find the book, searching first the office and the lobby and the rooms, when we returned in defeat, only to find it sitting on one of David's filing cabinets. He snorted derisively, and he went to pick it up. Its ancient-looking pages, yellowed by time, cracked as he opened it cautiously. From where I was standing, I couldn't see the words within, and moved to look at them over his shoulder. David slammed the covers closed. "Not yet, Sean. Soon." My temper flared. "David, I don't know anything about what's going on. I don't know what we're here to do today and why we're breaking 2 of our rules. I don't expect you to tell me everything, but you have to give me something." My anger receded as quickly as it had risen. I realized this was, despite everything, my employer. David smiled wryly. There was a second silence. "You're right, Sean. You deserve to know something. I'm sorry. After 15 years in this job, you begin to get used to not telling anyone more than what they need to know. 13 years ago, I made a mistake, Sean. Room 3 tricked me by using my affection for somebody close to me. I opened the room and almost brought disaster on us all. It's ironic. Only the sacrifice of the person I thought that I was saving helped delay disaster." "What do you mean delay?" "Yeah, Sean, we borrowed time. Yesterday, that time ran out. Unless we act, Room 3 won't even need anyone to open it anymore. It will escape by itself, and I can't allow that." "And the book, what is it?" "I guess you could call it a manual of sorts. The rules of the cinema are all in here." He looked down onto the pages again. I could tell this impromptu informational talk was over. I could be happy for even the little that I had gotten. David turned some pages, scanning their contents, before pointing at a piece of the page and smiling to himself. "Sean, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room for a while. Just for a little bit, this won't take long." I hesitated but obeyed. Standing in front of the room, I could see David's shadow on the drawn blinds of his office window as he moved around. Suddenly, another shadow sprang up from behind him. It walked around until they stood face to face. Another joined it, and then another. Muted voices reached me. David sounded resolute and determined. The answering voices, many talking over each other at one time, were sharp but barely heard whispers, like the drawing of a knife across skin. The shadows gathered around David. He stood unmoving, his hands falling to his sides. The shadows leapt. They slid, merging with David's, and he disappeared. Not waiting for a command, I ran into the office. I crashed through the door. David stood at his table, leaning on it tiredly and gasping for air, but he was unharmed. What the hell just happened? What the hell were those things? David chuckled to himself. I guess you could call them messengers, or taskmasters. Could you please not talk in riddles for once, David? I said, exasperated that even now I was being kept on a need-to-know basis. I called out to something that shouldn't be called, Sean, but this is a trying day and desperate times call for desperate measures. Let's go. It should be arriving soon enough, and I would hate to keep it waiting. He walked past me, still carrying the black book. After a second, I followed in mute frustration. Opening the door to the office, I saw what he had been talking about. Rule number 11, the lady in black. Rule number 11, if a woman in a black dress offers you a drink, do not accept. A woman stood before us. She was tall, taller than either of us, and her pale face contrasted with her deep dark hair. She wore a flowing midnight black dress. In her hands were a carved wooden goblet. I had encountered the lady in black before. She, or it, walked around the cinema often, stopping ushers every now and then to offer them a drink from her goblet. The liquid within was translucent and looked for all purposes like clear water. Somehow, I always doubted it was anything that harmless. Thankfully, she never forces a drink on us, making her one of the least dangerous things that you could encounter here. When you refused, she would nod silently, understandingly, and move on. Now she was here. "Will you accept my chalice?" she said, almost whispering, her voice faint and unfathomably sad. I made to refuse. It was almost muscle memory at that point, honed by dozens of encounters with her. But my words stuck in my throat when I realized that she wasn't looking at me. She was talking to David. He was quiet for a second. "I will," he answered finally. "David, what are you—" I began in confusion and panic, and he cut me off. "This has to be done, Sean. There's no other way that we can stop what's coming." He turned back to the lady in black. "It has been so long." She smiled faintly and passed him the cup. "Drink." David took the chalice. He hesitated for a moment, wavering. His face hardened suddenly. He drank the cup in one quick draught, and then he gasped, stumbled, and dropped it to the ground with a thud. He leaned on me heavily, and I almost fell over under his sudden weight. His face was sickly pale. He coughed, and specks of red fell to the floor. "You have paid the price," the lady whispered. "I have," David replied, shaking with more bloody coughing. "Now for your side of the bargain." "Indeed. What is it you seek?" She smiled sadly. I seek a way to halt Room 3 from breaking free." David was choosing his words carefully. He only had one shot at this, I realized. The lady frowned. "You will not like the answer, child. Are you sure this is what you wish to know?" "I am sure, damn you," David whispered through clenched teeth. A thin red trail ran down from the corner of his mouth. "Tell me." The lady leaned forward to his ear. She whispered to him words that I hope I never have to hear, and then she straightened her back again. "The bargain is complete. Farewell, David." She turned and walked away from us as if nothing had happened. She rounded a corner. Somehow I knew that she wouldn't be there if I looked. David turned to me. Blood was now dripping from the corner of his eyes, too. The black book fell from his fingers. "David, what did you do? What's happening? What did she tell you?" I had to lean forward to hear his reply, his voice weakening with every word. Go to the projection booth, Sean. Turn on all the projectors. Do it quick." The command in his tone was absolute. I ran for the projection booth. I swiftly flipped every switch, moving from projector to projector. The whir of machinery filled the air. Empty though it was, there was now a show in every room of the cinema. I realized what David was doing. Too late, I realized. I sprinted back for the lobby, taking the stairs from the booth 3 at a time. I had to be in time, I had to. He was not in front of the office anymore. The black book lay open from where it had fallen to the ground, the only indicator that he had even stood there. I ran over to it and looked around the lobby. Of course, David stood before room 3. His hand was on the handle. He looked back at me, blood in his eyes. "David, don't!" I screamed. 13 years, Sean. Use them well," he called out to me. He smiled and then he opened the door. The darkness on the other side was absolute, all light stopping the second that it hit the doorframe. David didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and closed the door behind him. I stood frozen. He was gone. There was a rumble and the earth shook. The door to room 3 rattled in its frame, as whatever was inside strained at the walls, eager to escape. But it struggled in vain. Whatever David had done, whatever his sacrifice had achieved, It had robbed room 3, bound it again, bought more time. The rumbling subsided. The door had stopped shaking. There was silence. A rustle of the pages below drew my gaze. I looked down at the book at my feet. It was open on the last page. There was only one sentence on it, written in black ink. Rule number 12. There must always be a manager.